Hey guys, today we begin a long, slow, and peaceful journey into the ancient British legend of King Arthur and the Sword in the Stone. This story takes us back to a time when the land was wild and mysterious, when kings were chosen not by birthright alone, but by signs of destiny woven into the very earth itself. For the next 2 hours, we will gently explore this tale, pausing often to breathe in the world around Arthur, the gentle sway of the forests, the whispered stories of old villages, the quiet rhythms of life that shaped the times. Before you settle in and get comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. In the comments, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see our sleepy little myth-loving community stretch across the world. And if there's a particular myth, legend, or story you'd love to hear next, share it below. I'm always listening. Now, dim the lights, let your thoughts slow down, and let's drift gently into tonight's story. Our story begins long ago, in a Britain cloaked in early morning mist. Imagine the soft haze rolling over endless green hills, dew clinging to blades of grass like tiny diamonds. The air is cool and fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming wildflowers, delicate bluebells, and the faint hint of heather growing wild in secluded patches. The distant call of a lone cuckoo echoes faintly, its song floating softly through the stillness of the dawn. In the heart of this ancient land stood a village, small and humble, nestled beneath towering oaks, whose leaves rustled gently in the morning breeze. These trees, ancient and wise, stretched their limbs high into the sky, their bark rough and patterned with age. The villagers lived simply, their homes made of sturdy timber and whitewashed stone, with thatched roofs woven tightly to keep out rain and cold winds. Smoke rose lazily from chimneys, curling upward in slow spirals, carrying the scent of burning peat and pine wood. Inside one such cottage, a woman stirred a pot over the hearth. The fire crackled softly, sending flickering shadows dancing across the walls lined with hand-woven tapestries and wooden shelves stacked with earthenware jars. The kitchen smelled warm and comforting, a blend of freshly baked barley bread, sharp tang of herbs drying by the window, and the sweet, earthy aroma of honey stored in clay pots. She hummed quietly as she worked, her hands skilled and steady, folding linen cloths and preparing for the day. Outside, the village was beginning to wake. Children's laughter mingled with the low murmur of adult voices, while the clatter of wooden carts on cobblestone paths stirred the morning air. Smoke from cooking fires drifted over gardens where peas, onions, and kale grew in neat rows, tended carefully by weathered hands. Chickens pecked at scattered grain, and a thin fog still clung to the fields where cattle grazed peacefully, their breath visible in the cool air. Farther beyond the village lay the great forest of the Greenwood, a place of shadows and stories. Towering pines stood like silent sentinels, their needles whispering secrets when the wind passed through. Moss blanketed the forest floor, soft and thick, muffling footsteps and adding to the quiet mystery. Small animals rustled in underbrush, a fox darting between tree trunks, the flash of a hare's white tail disappearing into a thicket, the steady tapping of a woodpecker searching for insects beneath bark. This forest was more than just a place of wood and stone. It was alive with ancient magic and old legends passed down by generations. It was said that the spirits of the land watched over the trees, and that in its depths one might find hidden springs where the water shimmered like liquid silver, or clearings where the moonlight gathered in pools, making the night glow with a soft, otherworldly light. Our story weaves through this world, where the ordinary and the extraordinary met. Into this quiet life came a boy named Arthur, who was unlike other children, though no one yet knew the destiny that awaited him. Arthur's father, Uther Pendragon, was a powerful king, but his reign was marked by war and uncertainty. The land yearned for peace, for a ruler who could unite the scattered tribes and bring harmony to the restless kingdoms. But this was a time of waiting, a time of whispers. And in the midst of this waiting, a strange event occurred. A sword appeared, not in the hand of a warrior, but stuck fast within a stone, deep in the courtyard of the great cathedral. The sword glinted dully in the morning sun, its hilt wrapped in worn leather, the blade shining faintly with a silver light. No man could pull it free, for it was said that only the true king, chosen by fate and virtue, could release the sword and claim the throne. People came from far and wide to try their strength, but none succeeded. The courtyard echoed with grunts of effort and sighs of disappointment, but the sword remained firm. This sword was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of hope, a sign that destiny was watching and waiting. Meanwhile, life in the village went on. The simple rhythms of the seasons marked the passing of days. Men rose early to tend their fields, their breath misting in the chilly air. Women gathered at wells to draw fresh water, their laughter soft and steady, their voices blending with the hum of bees working the clover. At dusk, families gathered around fires to share stories, tales of heroes and gods, of battles won and lost, and of the land itself, ancient and enduring. In one small cottage near the edge of the forest lived Merlin, a wise man whose eyes seemed to hold the secrets of the earth. His hair was long and white as winter snow, and his beard flowed like a river of silver. He wore robes woven from deep blue fabric, embroidered with stars and swirling patterns that seemed to shimmer in the firelight. Merlin was a man of quiet power, one who spoke softly but whose words carried weight. He was said to know the language of birds and the songs of the stones. As the days passed, Merlin watched Arthur grow, seeing in him a spark that others could not yet perceive. The boy was kind and curious, often wandering the forest paths, listening to the wind and watching the play of light through leaves. His heart was gentle, but within him lay a strength that would soon be tested. This is where our story begins, in the soft morning light of an ancient Britain, full of quiet wonders and hidden destinies. For now we linger in this calm world, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath our feet, hearing the gentle crackle of the fire, and sensing the promise of a tale yet to unfold. As you listen, let the sounds of the fire and the slow, steady rhythm of the story carry you deeper into rest. Let the images of misty hills and whispering forests drift gently through your mind as the legend of King Arthur and the sword in the stone begins to unfold, softly, slowly, and peacefully. As the soft light of morning continued to wash over the quiet land, the story of young Arthur slowly unfolded like the petals of a delicate flower, revealing layers of gentle detail that spoke of a world both simple and profound. In this part of the tale, we draw closer to Arthur's early days, where the ordinary moments of childhood mingle with the undercurrents of destiny. Arthur's childhood was not marked by grand celebrations or heroic deeds, but rather by the subtle textures of everyday life in a village nestled between rolling hills and ancient woods. Imagine the warm glow of a hearth fire in the center of a modest wooden hall, where the scent of burning oak and dried herbs filled the air. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows across rough-hewn beams overhead, while woven tapestries hung on the walls, depicting scenes of hunts and forests, reminders of the natural world that shaped the people who lived here. In the mornings, Arthur would awaken to the gentle crowing of a rooster somewhere beyond the village edge, its call carrying softly through the cool air, mingling with the rustle of leaves stirred by an early breeze. He would dress in simple woolen clothes, spun and dyed in muted colors of brown and green, crafted by the hands of his caretakers who knew the value of warmth and durability in the often chilly climate. The fabric had a slightly coarse texture, but was soft enough to comfort a growing boy. Outside, the village was beginning its daily rhythm. Women gathered near wells, their voices low and steady as they drew water from deep stone basins, the splash of metal buckets against the stone adding a gentle rhythm to the morning. The water was cold and clear, fresh from the hidden springs beneath the hills, and as they carried it back to their homes, the scent of wet earth and moss clung faintly to their skirts. The villagers' diets were humble but sustaining. Morning meals might include freshly baked barley bread, dense and earthy in flavor, paired with creamy goat cheese and a drizzle of honey harvested from nearby hives. The honey was golden and thick, with a floral sweetness that spoke of wildflowers blooming in distant meadows. Occasionally, dried fruits or nuts were added, their rich textures offering a welcome contrast. Arthur himself was curious and thoughtful, often wandering beyond the village limits with a quiet sense of wonder. He would roam through sun-dappled clearings where rays of light filtered through the canopy in soft, golden beams, illuminating patches of wildflowers, bluebells, primroses, and delicate foxgloves that nodded gently in the breeze. The air was filled with the scent of damp leaves and pine needles, mingling with faint hints of distant smoke from hearth fires. Birdsong was a constant companion. The sweet, warbling notes of the nightingale hidden deep within the thicket, the sharp calls of jays flitting between branches, and the steady tapping of woodpeckers echoing through the trees. Sometimes, a gentle rustle in the undergrowth revealed a shy deer or a family of rabbits, their movements cautious but graceful. As Arthur explored these woods, his mind was open to the stories carried on the wind tales told in whispers by the villagers and passed from elder to child like precious heirlooms. These stories spoke of noble warriors, enchanted creatures, and the ancient power that pulsed beneath the very soil. Back in the village, daily tasks went on uninterrupted by the larger tides of fate. Blacksmiths hammered rhythmically at glowing iron, the sparks flying like tiny stars in the dim light of their forges. Their work was essential, from crafting horseshoes to shaping tools used in the fields. Their skill was both practical and, in a way, sacred. The metallic clang resonated through the air, mixing with the low murmur of voices and the occasional bark of a dog patrolling the village edges. Farmers tended their animals with steady hands, their weathered faces etched by years of sun and wind. Goats and sheep grazed on grassy slopes, their soft bleats blending with the whisper of the breeze. Horses, strong and patient, stood tethered near wooden stables, their coats gleaming faintly under the morning light. The villagers' homes were simple but warm. Inside, wooden beams were darkened by smoke from open fires, and earthen floors were swept clean daily. In kitchens, pots of stew simmered slowly over embers, filling the rooms with inviting aromas of roasted root vegetables, herbs like thyme and rosemary, and a hint of salt from the nearby sea. Woven baskets held freshly gathered nuts and berries, and loaves of bread rested on wooden tables, still warm and crusty. Arthur's caretakers, who raised him with gentle hands and watchful eyes, were deeply connected to this way of life. They understood the cycles of nature, the rhythms of planting and harvest, the phases of the moon, and the signs written in the sky. They taught Arthur not just skills of survival, but lessons in patience, kindness, and respect for the earth. Though he was raised away from the courts and the politics of kings, Arthur was no stranger to tales of power and honor. Around evening fires, elders would speak softly of the great kings of old men who wielded swords not just as weapons, but as symbols of justice and strength. They spoke of Excalibur, the legendary sword that would one day belong to a true king. Though these stories were wrapped in mystery, they were also reminders of hope, shining like distant stars in the night sky. It was during these quiet evenings that Merlin's presence became more noticeable. The wise man would visit the village, often appearing unexpectedly at the edge of the forest, his long robes brushing the grass, his eyes deep pools of knowledge and calm. He would speak in a low, soothing voice, telling stories that seemed to dance between reality and myth, and he carried with him a staff carved from elder wood, entwined with symbols of old magic. Merlin's guidance was subtle yet profound. He encouraged Arthur to look beyond the visible world, to listen to the language of nature, the rustle of leaves, the murmur of streams, and the songs of birds. He taught that strength was not only in the body, but also in the heart and mind, and that destiny often took shape in quiet moments of reflection. One of Merlin's favorite lessons was about patience. He would say, "The oak grows slowly, but its roots run deep. So must a king's wisdom." With these words, Arthur learned to embrace the stillness around him, finding comfort in the steady rhythms of the land. As the seasons turned, Arthur grew in stature and understanding. The village shifted with the changing weather, golden sunlight warming the meadows in summer, soft rains nurturing the earth in autumn, the hush of frost coating the ground in winter's early dawn. Each season brought its own sounds and scents. The buzz of bees in spring, the crisp rustle of fallen leaves, the sharp tang of smoke as fires burned longer to keep out the cold. In the background of this simple life, the great sword in the stone awaited its rightful bearer. The courtyard where it stood was often quiet in the early morning, bathed in pale light, the blade gleaming faintly beneath a veil of dew. Sometimes villagers would gather near, sharing stories or casting hopeful glances at the sword, wondering who might one day claim it. Yet, for now, the sword remained still, unmoved by strength or will. And so, we leave young Arthur walking the forest paths, a boy unaware of the greatness that will soon call to him. We linger on the gentle rustling of leaves, the distant murmur of a stream, the warmth of a slowly dying fire. As you listen, let your breath slow and deepen, matching the calm pulse of the earth. Let the soft sounds of the fire carry you further into rest as the legend unfolds, quietly and gently, one step at a time. As the days flowed quietly onward, the landscape around Arthur remained a living tapestry of soft colors, gentle sounds, and slow, deliberate movements that echoed the rhythm of an ancient and timeless world. In this part of the story, we follow Arthur as he moves closer to the moment when fate begins to stir more insistently, while everyday life continues its soothing cycle. The morning mist hung low over the village, settling like a silken veil across fields and rooftops, softening edges and muffling sounds. The air was crisp, tinged with the subtle scent of wet moss and pine, while the delicate fragrance of wildflowers, violets, and primroses lingered faintly beneath. The sky, painted in pale hues of pink and lavender, promised a gentle day. Arthur awoke once again in his modest chamber, where beams of early sunlight sifted through narrow windows framed by simple linen curtains. The wooden walls were cool to the touch, bearing the faint imprint of knots and grain. Near his bedside, a small carved box held keepsake smooth stones gathered from riverbeds, a feather plucked from a woodland bird, and a worn leather-bound book filled with stories and sketches, gifts from his caretakers, who nurtured his imagination. After dressing, Arthur stepped outside into the cool embrace of the morning. The village stirred with familiar sounds, the clip-clop of horse hooves on soft earth, the murmur of voices greeting the day, and the distant hammering from the blacksmith's forge. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, blending with the mist as it rose toward the awakening sky. The villagers moved through their daily routines with steady hands and practiced grace. Women gathered eggs from wooden coops where hens clucked softly, pecking at scattered grain beneath the trees. The scent of freshly churned butter mingled with the earthy aroma of damp soil as farmers prepared to tend their fields. Young children, bundled in woolen cloaks, played quietly near stone walls, their laughter light and free. Arthur's footsteps led him toward the edge of the great forest, where towering oaks and beeches stood like guardians of an ancient realm. The forest floor was a patchwork of soft moss, fallen leaves, and tangled roots that told stories older than any man. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in dappled patterns, creating shifting mosaics of light and shadow. As he walked, Arthur's senses drank deeply of the world around him. The rustling of leaves whispered secrets in a language only the patient could hear. A gentle breeze carried the distant song of a thrush, and the faint hum of bees drifted lazily through the air. The ground beneath his feet was firm yet yielding, alive with the tiny movements of insects and the slow, steady growth of plants. Near a sparkling brook, Arthur paused to watch water trickle over smooth stones, its surface catching the light like a mirror fragmented by ripples. The coolness of the stream invited his fingers to touch, sending a shiver up his arm and awakening a quiet sense of wonder. He could see small fish darting beneath the surface, their scales shimmering like liquid silver. In this peaceful moment, the world felt vast and gentle, filled with possibility. Returning to the village, Arthur found Merlin waiting near the edge of the woods. The old man's eyes, clear and deep, reflected the soft light of the morning. His robes, embroidered with stars and swirling patterns, rustled softly in the breeze as he approached. "Good morning, young Arthur," Merlin greeted, his voice calm and steady. "The world is full of signs for those who know how to look." Arthur nodded, his curiosity always eager. "What signs do you see today, Merlin?" The wizard smiled faintly, his gaze drifting toward the distant hills. "The sword in the stone remains unmoved, yet its time is drawing near. Patience is the true strength now." Together, they walked toward the village square, where the great cathedral stood, a towering structure of ancient stone, its walls weathered by centuries of wind and rain. The cathedral's tall spires reached toward the sky, adorned with carvings of saints and beasts, their faces softened by time. In the courtyard before the cathedral, the sword stood silently embedded in the stone, its hilt catching the light like a beacon. The gathered crowd was sparse this morning, a few villagers lingering with quiet hope, their eyes fixed on the gleaming blade. Some whispered prayers, others exchanged stories of past attempts to claim the sword, each failure adding to the legend. Arthur's gaze lingered on the sword, feeling an inexplicable pull, quiet calling that stirred deep within him. He reached out slowly, fingers brushing the worn leather of the hilt. The stone beneath felt cold and solid, yet beneath that hardness was a pulse, faint but unmistakable, like the heartbeat of the land itself. Around them, life continued its gentle flow, Nearby, children chased one another with carefree laughter, their feet pounding softly on cobblestones. Women carried baskets of freshly gathered herbs, their movements rhythmic and serene. The aroma of baking bread drifted from open windows, mingling with the scent of damp stone and blooming ivy climbing the cathedral walls. As the day unfolded, Arthur's thoughts wandered to the future, to the hope that the sword represented, and to the mysterious path that lay ahead. The quiet world around him was both comforting and filled with promise, a place where destiny and daily life were intertwined like the roots of the oldest trees. In the fading light of evening, the village gathered again around fires that flickered and crackled, sending warm glows into the cool air. Stories were shared softly, voices low and soothing, weaving threads of history and myth into the fabric of the night. The scent of roasting chestnuts and the sweet smoke of pine filled the air, wrapping the listeners in a cozy embrace. Merlin's words lingered in Arthur's mind as he lay down to rest beneath a blanket of stars. The oak grows slowly, but its roots run deep. So must a king's wisdom. With that thought, the night wrapped around the land like a gentle lullaby, carrying all to peaceful sleep, and the legend continued its slow, steady unfolding. The world around Arthur was alive with textures and subtle movements, as if every leaf, every breath of wind, and every distant sound carried a quiet story waiting to be told. The morning broke slowly, soft rays of amber light seeping through the pale curtain of dawn like liquid gold spilling gently across the landscape. The sky was painted with muted pastels, blush pinks merging seamlessly into cool grays, the edges of clouds outlined faintly as if touched by the hand of a careful artist. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth, mingled with the sweet sharpness of wild honeysuckle blooming along the village hedgerows. Tiny droplets of dew clung to spiderwebs strung between low branches, glistening like strings of fragile pearls, each reflecting the awakening sky in miniature. The quiet hum of insects began to swell, a soft orchestration of wings and legs brushing over leaves and grass, accompanied by the distant rhythmic tapping of a woodpecker echoing through the woods. Arthur's small wooden chamber was still cool from the night's rest. The rough-hewn beams above him bore the faint scars of time, tiny notches carved by hands long gone, telling silent tales of childhood games and simple joys. A faint draft whispered through the cracks in the walls, carrying the fresh smell of pine resin from the forest nearby. The floorboards creaked gently beneath worn woolen slippers, their faded blue threads soft against his skin. Near the hearth, a small clay pot simmered quietly, releasing a faint aroma of brewed herbs, a blend of chamomile and mint, chosen to soothe restless minds. The flickering firelight danced in delicate patterns, casting long, wavering shadows that stretched and contracted with the breath of the flames. The warmth wrapped around the room like a soft blanket, a contrast to the coolness beyond the walls. Arthur rose slowly, the muscles in his legs awakening with the stretch and pull of movement. His fingers brushed over a wooden box carved with intricate Celtic knots, a gift from his guardian, before he dressed in simple linen tunic and trousers dyed in earth tones. The fabric was rough but comforting, the weave uneven in places, evidence of the handcraft that went into every stitch. Outside, the village was stirring to life beneath a sky, now brightening to a clear, pale blue. The cobblestone streets, worn smooth by countless footsteps, glistened faintly where the last raindrops from the night before clung stubbornly to their surfaces. Children's voices carried on the breeze, soft giggles interspersed with the occasional shout of a game in progress. Nearby, the blacksmith's forge roared to life, the fiery glow of the coals visible through the open door, sending sparks flying upward like fleeting stars. The scent of baking bread floated from open windows, a heady mixture of warm yeast and toasted crust, mingling with the sharper tang of burning peat smoke from chimneys. Women moved with practiced grace, tending gardens bursting with early spring greens, tender shoots of kale and lettuce, fragrant herbs like thyme and rosemary. Their hands, strong yet gentle, coaxed life from the soil, nurturing the earth as their ancestors had done for generations. Arthur's footsteps led him toward the forest's edge, where ancient trees stood sentinel. The bark of oaks and beeches was rough beneath his touch, covered in a patchwork of mosses and lichens that felt like velvet and stone combined. The canopy above was thick, filtering sunlight into a mosaic of emerald and gold. The air inside the woods was cooler, tinged with a rich, damp scent of decaying leaves and fertile soil, the very essence of life's endless cycle. Here, the world felt slower, as if time itself hesitated among the shadows. Arthur listened to the subtle symphony of the forest, the soft rustle of small animals in underbrush, the distant call of a hawk soaring high above, the gentle babble of a hidden stream winding through stones, polished smooth by centuries of water. He paused beside the stream, watching clear water ripple over smooth pebbles, the surface broken by the occasional leap of a darting fish. The sunlight caught droplets clinging to blades of grass, turning them into tiny prisms of light. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves, carrying with it the faintest whisper of voices long past tales of warriors and kings, magic and honor, woven invisibly into the fabric of the land. Returning to the village, Arthur's senses absorbed every detail. The worn wooden wheels of carts creaking softly on rutted paths, the chatter of merchants arranging baskets of fresh fruit and dried herbs, the delicate brush of linen dresses against weathered stone walls. Smoke rose from numerous hearths, its scent a tapestry of burning oak, dried lavender, and the occasional hint of roasted meat. In the great hall of the village chief, the mood was calm but expectant. The walls, hung with tapestries depicting legendary battles and serene countryside scenes, absorbed the flickering firelight. Long wooden tables bore simple clay dishes filled with hearty stews of root vegetables and tender mutton, the rich aroma mingling with the warmth of the room. People spoke in low tones, their voices a soothing murmur blending with the crackle of flames. Merlin sat quietly by the hearth, his eyes reflecting both the firelight and a deep, ancient wisdom. His fingers traced patterns in the air as he murmured soft incantations, not loud enough to disturb, but enough to be felt. A gentle weaving of the unseen threads that connected all things. His presence was a calm anchor in the ever-shifting tides of fate. Arthur approached him slowly, a mixture of reverence and curiosity in his gaze. Merlin's voice was a quiet ripple over still water. "The time draws near, young one. Within you lies a strength not yet fully known, a root reaching deep into the earth beneath your feet." Outside, the sword and the stone awaited silently, bathed in the golden light of afternoon. The hilt, wrapped in worn leather, was cool to the touch, the blade gleaming faintly like a sliver of dawn. Birds alighted nearby, their feathers shimmering iridescent in the sun, their songs delicate threads woven into the fabric of the moment. Around the courtyard, villagers moved with purpose and hope, some whispering prayers, others exchanging knowing glances. The air was thick with anticipation, yet tinged with the quiet patience that had settled over the land for many moons. As twilight approached, the sky deepened to a rich indigo, studded with stars that blinked slowly above. The village grew still, wrapped in the hush of evening. Fires were lit once more, their warm glow spilling across stone and timber, while the scent of pine smoke drifted lazily upward. Inside his chamber, Arthur lay beneath soft blankets woven from sheep's wool, the texture rough yet soothing against his skin. The day's sights and sounds wove through his thoughts like a gentle river, carrying him toward dreams where destiny and memory danced intertwined. And as the night deepened, the quiet legend of a boy and a sword continued, unfolding softly like a slow breath, inviting all who listened to drift deeper into rest and wonder. The early morning light spilled softly over the horizon, brushing the tops of distant hills with a tender glow that gradually stretched across the sleepy village like a gentle awakening sigh. The air was cool and still, filled with the delicate scent of moist earth mingled with the faint sweetness of wild strawberries ripening quietly beneath the brambles. Mist clung low to the fields and riverbanks, weaving a silvery veil that softened shapes and sounds, wrapping the world in a hushed embrace. Arthur stirred in his modest chamber, the rough linen of his blankets whispering against his skin as he shifted slowly, reluctant to leave the warmth behind. Outside, a soft chorus of birdsong greeted the dawn, the clear, liquid notes of a blackbird, blending with the rhythmic drumming of a woodpecker nearby. The village was beginning to stir in its own time. The faint rustle of movement and the gentle murmur of waking voices carried faintly through the open window. The wooden beams overhead, darkened by years of smoke and time, stood firm and steady, framing the quiet room with a sense of permanence and safety. Arthur sat up, running his fingers over the worn surface of a small carved box resting beside his bed, a keepsake filled with smooth stones and feathers, each collected from his wanderings and treasured as pieces of the world's silent story. Dressing in simple garments dyed in soft shades of brown and green, Arthur stepped outside into the cool embrace of the morning. The village was bathed in pale light, its stone walls and timbered roofs softened by the lingering mist. Smoke curled upward from chimneys, carrying the rich scent of burning peat and pine, mingling with the fresh aroma of dew-soaked grass and blooming wildflowers. Near the well, women gathered in quiet conversation, their hands skilled and sure as they drew cool water from the stone basin. Their voices were low and steady, the cadence of their speech a soothing rhythm blending with the gentle splash of buckets and the occasional clink of metal pails. Their garments were woven from homespun wool and linen, dyed with natural colors from bark and berries, the textures uneven but warm and comforting. The village green was dotted with carts, laden with freshly harvested vegetables, root crops like turnips and parsnips, carrots with their bright green tops still glistening with dew, and sturdy cabbages tightly packed and ready for market. The air was alive with the mingled scents of earth and produce, a reminder of the land's generous bounty nurtured by patient hands. Arthur made his way toward the forest's edge, the soft crunch of his boots on fallen leaves and twigs marking his passage through the quiet undergrowth. The trees stood tall and solemn, their trunks thick with age and wisdom. Moss and lichen clung in thick carpets to bark and stone, their deep greens and silvers, a tapestry of life thriving in shadowed places. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in gentle shafts, illuminating patches of delicate ferns and wildflowers. The air here was cooler and sweeter, scented with pine needles and rich soil. Every breath filled Arthur's lungs with the living essence of the woods, a mix of damp earth, fresh resin, and the faint hint of blooming heather. He paused by a small clearing where a crystal-clear spring bubbled up from the ground, its waters cool and pure. Kneeling, Arthur cupped the fresh liquid in his hands, feeling its chill ripple through his fingers and revive his spirit. Tiny fish darted beneath the surface, their scales catching light like scattered gems. Around the spring, delicate flowers, violets, and primroses nodded gently in the breeze, their colors vivid against the soft green moss. The forest whispered ancient stories here, tales carried on the wind and hidden in the rustling leaves. Arthur listened with a quiet heart, sensing the presence of something larger than himself, the pulse of the earth beneath his feet, the deep roots of the past intertwining with the fragile shoots of the present. Returning to the village as the sun climbed higher, Arthur's path crossed with familiar faces, farmers leading oxen to the fields, children chasing one another with carefree laughter, and elders sitting on stone benches, their eyes bright with memories and quiet wisdom. The scent of baking bread mingled with the aroma of roasting herbs, while the soft clatter of wooden tools and the occasional bark of dogs created a comforting soundscape. In the village square, the great cathedral loomed, its ancient stones glowing warmly in the sunlight. The carved faces of saints and beasts watched silently from their perches, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. The sword in the stone stood at its heart, gleaming faintly in the light, the worn leather of its hilt cool and firm to the touch. Around the courtyard, hopeful villagers gathered quietly, their voices hushed with reverence. Some offered silent prayers, others shared soft stories of those who had tried and failed to free the blade. The air was thick, with a blend of anticipation and patience, a delicate balance between longing and calm acceptance. Arthur approached the sword once more, his fingers tracing the intricate Celtic knotwork etched into the hilt. A faint warmth seemed to spread through his palm, a quiet reassurance from the ancient blade. Though he was still young and unaware of all the trials to come, in this moment, the weight of destiny pressed gently upon him. As the day waned and the sky shifted to soft shades of pink and lavender, the village settled into the peaceful quiet of evening. Fires were lit in hearths and braziers, sending flickering shadows dancing across walls and cobblestones. The smell of roasted chestnuts and sweet herbs filled the air, mingling with the crisp scent of burning pine. Voices lowered to gentle murmurs, stories told softly by the firelight weaving a comforting blanket over all who listened. Merlin's presence was felt in the calm assurance of his words, his deep knowledge flowing like a steady stream beneath the surface of quiet conversation. Arthur lay beneath a woven blanket of wool and linen, the textures rough yet soothing against his skin. The stars above twinkled faintly, their slow pulse echoing the rhythm of the land itself. Dreams came gently, carrying whispers of ancient magic and the slow turning of fate. And so, the legend of King Arthur and the Sword in the Stone continued to unfold, not as a rush of great battles or loud triumphs, but as a steady, quiet awakening. A soft song of hope and destiny whispered on the breath of the earth. The first light of dawn seeped gently through the narrow window panes of Arthur's chamber, painting delicate patterns of gold and rose across the rough wooden floor. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of pine resin and morning dew that lingered in the nearby forest. Outside, a soft chorus of birds greeted the new day, the clear, melodious call of a song thrush mingling with the rhythmic tapping of a woodpecker echoing from ancient oaks. Arthur lay quietly beneath his woolen blankets, the coarse yet comforting fabric wrapped loosely around him like a protective embrace. The faint crackle of embers from the dying fire in the hearth added a gentle soundtrack to the serene morning. The walls, darkened by time and smoke, held shadows that shifted slowly as the sun rose higher, the muted light offering a quiet reassurance of safety and warmth. He rose slowly, every movement deliberate and unhurried, savoring the familiar textures of his room, the cool stone of the window ledge beneath his fingertips, the smooth surface of a small wooden carving resting on his bedside table. His gaze lingered on the intricate patterns etched into the figure, an ancient symbol passed down from his guardians, its meaning woven into the tapestry of his life. Outside, the village was awakening. The faint murmur of voices drifted through open doorways as women drew fresh water from stone wells, their hands steady and practiced, the cool liquid splashing softly into clay pots. The aroma of baking bread filled the air, warm and inviting, mingling with the earthy scent of damp soil and fresh herbs drying in the sun. Arthur dressed in simple linen garments, the fabric cool and slightly rough against his skin. He stepped outside into the crisp morning, the cobblestones beneath his feet still glistening with dew. Around him, the village stirred to life. Carts creaked as they rolled along rutted paths. Oxen lowed softly in fields bordered by ancient stone walls, and children's laughter echoed faintly from the village green, where they played under watchful eyes. The great forest beckoned beyond the village, its shadows deep and inviting. Towering oaks and beeches stood like silent sentinels, their bark thick and rough, adorned with mosses and lichens that softened their ancient forms. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in dappled pools, illuminating patches of wildflowers, violets, bluebells, and delicate primroses that nodded gently in the breeze. Arthur wandered the forest paths, his senses drinking in the cool, fragrant air. The rich scent of pine needles mingled with the subtle sweetness of flowering heather, while the soft rustle of leaves whispered ancient secrets. Small creatures scurried unseen in the underbrush, and overhead, birds flitted from branch to branch, their songs weaving a delicate tapestry of sound. Near a clear, bubbling spring, Arthur paused to cup the cold water in his hands. The liquid shimmered like liquid glass, reflecting the sky's soft blue hues. Tiny fish darted beneath the surface, their scales flashing silver in the light. Around the spring, delicate ferns unfurled their fronds, and soft moss blanketed the stones, cool and springy beneath his feet. Returning to the village, Arthur felt the steady heartbeat of life all around him, the rhythmic hammering from the blacksmith's forge, the low murmur of voices sharing morning news, the scent of herbs and spices from open market stalls. Every detail was a thread in the rich fabric of his world, grounding him even as the call of destiny stirred quietly within. In the village square, the great cathedral stood proudly, its ancient stones warmed by the sun's gentle touch. The carved faces of saints and beasts gazed silently down from weathered ledges, their features softened by centuries of wind and rain. At the center, the sword in the stone waited, its blade gleaming faintly, the worn leather hilt cool to the touch. Villagers gathered near, their expressions a blend of reverence and hope. Soft prayers whispered into the air, mingling with the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant cry of a hawk soaring overhead. Children peered from behind mothers' skirts, wide-eyed and curious, sensing the quiet magic in the air. Arthur stepped forward, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon him. His fingers closed gently around the hilt, the cool leather ruff beneath his palm. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled. To the astonishment of all, The sword slid free with ease, as if the stone itself had been waiting for this very moment. A hush fell over the crowd, broken only by the soft rustle of wind through the trees. The sun broke through a patch of clouds, casting a warm golden light upon Arthur, the blade shimmering like a beacon of hope. In that quiet, sacred moment, the legend was born, a tale of courage, wisdom, and the slow, steady unfolding of destiny. The soft light of dawn filtered through the branches of the ancient oaks surrounding the village, casting long, slender shadows that stretched like gentle fingers across the dew-kissed grass. The air was cool and still, carrying the subtle fragrance of damp earth mingled with the faint sweetness of blooming wildflowers, bluebells, primroses, and delicate wild roses swaying softly in the light morning breeze. Tiny droplets of dew clung to spider webs spun between slender twigs, each bead shimmering like a string of miniature crystals in the quiet light. Inside a humble cottage at the village edge, the first rays of sun slipped past the wooden shutters and caressed the rough wooden floorboards, warming the simple room. The walls were adorned with woven tapestries depicting scenes of rolling hills and woodland creatures, their colors muted but comforting in the soft morning glow. A low fire still smoldered in the hearth, its embers casting a faint orange glow and sending a gentle warmth into the cool air. Arthur lay wrapped in thick woolen blankets, the coarse fabric rough against his skin but heavy and protective like a shield. The quiet crackle of the dying fire mingled with the distant chorus of waking birds, the steady rhythm of life unfolding slowly around him. As he stirred awake, the familiar scents of pine smoke and fresh bread wafted gently through the open window, mingling with the faint aroma of herbs drying on wooden beams. Rising carefully, Arthur dressed in a simple linen tunic, the fabric cool and slightly stiff from being folded the night before, and pulled on soft leather boots worn smooth from many walks through the forest paths. He stepped outside into the fresh morning air, the soft crunch of grass and scattered twigs beneath his feet, blending with the muted murmur of villagers beginning their day. The village was alive with gentle activity. Women gathered near the stone well, their voices low and steady as they drew water from its depths, the buckets splashing softly against the ancient stones. Their hands moved with practiced ease, tending to woven baskets filled with fresh herbsage, rosemary, and thyme that released their fragrant oils into the crisp air. Nearby, children chased one another in playful circles, their laughter light and unhurried, carried softly by the breeze. Arthur's path led him toward the edge of the great forest, where towering beeches and oaks stood sentinel, their bark rough and deeply grooved, cloaked in thick blankets of moss and lichen. The canopy above filtered sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor, illuminating carpets of soft ferns and clusters of tiny woodland flowers. The scent here was richer, a complex blend of pine needles, moist earth, and the sweet tang of blooming heather. As he walked, the gentle rustling of leaves and the occasional call of a jay created a soothing symphony, the sounds weaving through the air like a soft lullaby. Small creatures moved stealthily in the underbrush, squirrels darting among branches, the flicker of a rabbit's white tail disappearing behind a moss-covered log. Arthur paused beside a clear, bubbling spring, where water flowed over smooth stones, its surface broken by the occasional ripple of a tiny fish darting beneath. He knelt to cup the cool water in his hands, feeling the refreshing chill wash over his skin, a simple gift from the forest that invigorated body and spirit alike. Around the spring, delicate violet petals fluttered in the breeze, their colors vivid against the soft green moss. Returning to the village as the sun climbed higher, Arthur took in the steady heartbeat of life all around him, the rhythmic hammering of the blacksmith shaping glowing iron, the low murmur of merchants arranging their wares of fresh fruits, nuts, and dried meats, the soft clatter of wooden tools and wheels turning on well-worn carts. At the heart of the village, the great cathedral stood tall and proud, its weathered stone walls warmed by the afternoon sun. Carvings of saints and beasts gazed silently from ledges above, their features softened by centuries of wind and rain. In the courtyard, the sword remained firmly embedded in the stone, its blade catching the light and casting faint glimmers like distant stars. Villagers gathered quietly nearby, their eyes filled with hope and reverence. Some offered whispered prayers, others exchanged gentle smiles and stories of those who had tried to free the blade in times past. The air was thick with a sense of calm anticipation, the steady pulse of faith and patience that had settled over the land. Arthur approached the sword once more, his fingers tracing the familiar Celtic knots carved into the hilt, feeling a quiet warmth seep into his palm. Though he was still young and uncertain, a soft certainty stirred deep within him, a connection to the land, to the legacy of kings past, and to the future yet unwritten. As the day faded into twilight, the village settled into the soothing embrace of evening. Fires flickered in hearths and braziers, sending dancing shadows across timber and stone. The scent of roasting chestnuts and sweet-smelling herbs filled the air, mingling with the crisp, clean fragrance of night air touched by pine smoke. Voices softened to murmurs, stories told gently by firelight weaving a comforting tapestry of history and hope. Merlin's calm presence lingered like a steady flame, his wisdom a quiet guide in the unfolding legend. Arthur lay beneath a heavy woolen blanket, the texture rough but warm against his skin. Above, stars twinkled faintly in the deepening sky, their slow, steady pulse echoing the timeless rhythm of the earth itself. Dreams came softly, carrying whispers of ancient magic, courage, and the slow, steady unfolding of destiny. The early morning mist still clung softly to the rolling hills surrounding the village, weaving delicate threads of silver through the tall grasses and the scattered wildflowers that nodded gently beneath its touch. The sky above was a pale canvas of soft blues and faint pinks, promising the slow arrival of a warm, tranquil day. The air held a crisp freshness, tinged lightly with the scent of damp earth and pine resin carried in from the dense forest nearby. Within his modest chamber, Arthur lay beneath thick woolen blankets, the coarse fabric rustling quietly as he stirred awake. The pale light filtered through narrow windows, casting gentle patterns across the worn wooden floor. Around him, the room breathed with the muted sounds of early morning, the faint crackle of dying embers in the hearth, the distant chirping of birds beginning their day, and the soft rustle of linen curtains swaying in a light breeze. Rising slowly, Arthur's bare feet met the cool floorboards, the wood worn smooth by countless footsteps over many years. The air inside was tinged faintly, with the smell of burning peat mixed with the sweet aroma of dried herbs hanging from wooden beams, bundles of lavender, rosemary, and thyme that filled the room with a calming presence. Dressing carefully, Arthur pulled on simple garments of homespun linen, dyed in muted earth tones, the fabric soft from many washes, but still carrying the slight stiffness of hand-woven cloth. He laced his leather boots, worn yet sturdy, their supple texture molded to his feet from long use. Stepping outside, the village greeted him with its gentle morning chorus. The soft clatter of wooden carts over cobblestones blended with the murmur of villagers exchanging quiet greetings. Smoke spiraled upwards from chimneys, carrying the rich, woody scent of peat fires, mingled with the faint sweetness of burning pine needles. Near the well, women gathered in clusters, their hands moving deftly as they drew clear water from its depths. Their voices, low and melodic, mingled with the splash of buckets and the occasional clink of metal pails. They wore garments of dyed wool and linen, their colors subdued yet warm deep blues, soft greens, and muted browns, reflecting the natural hues of their surroundings. Arthur's path led him once more toward the edge of the great forest, where ancient trees stood like silent sentinels. The rough bark of oaks and beeches was mottled with moss and lichen, softening their age-old faces and lending a quiet dignity. The canopy above filtered sunlight into a patchwork of golden light and cool shadow, illuminating carpets of delicate ferns, blooming wildflowers, and the occasional mushroom nestled among fallen leaves. The air here was thick with the rich, earthy scent of decaying foliage and fresh pine resin, a heady blend that spoke of the life cycles woven into the forest's depths. Small creatures stirred unseen in the underbrush, squirrels darting nimbly among branches, the flash of a rabbit's white tail disappearing into a thicket, and birds flitting between trees in bursts of color and song. At a quiet spring, Arthur paused to drink from the clear, cold water bubbling over smooth stones. The liquid shimmered in the soft light, reflecting the sky's pale blue hues. Nearby, delicate wildflowers, violets, primroses, and forget-me, knots bent gently in the breeze, their colors vivid against the lush green moss. Returning to the village as the sun climbed higher, Arthur took in the familiar rhythms of daily life, the rhythmic pounding from the blacksmith's forge, the low murmur of merchants arranging baskets of fresh produce, and the gentle clatter of wooden wheels on worn paths. The air was alive with scents of baking bread, roasting meats, and drying herbs, creating a comforting tapestry of aromas. In the village square, the ancient cathedral stood in quiet majesty, its weathered stones warmed by the afternoon sun. The carved faces of saints and mythical beasts looked down silently from their ledges, softened by centuries of wind and rain. The sword in the stone gleamed faintly at its center, its leather-wrapped hilt cool and inviting to the touch. Villagers gathered quietly nearby, their eyes filled with reverence and hope. Soft prayers and whispered stories mingled with the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant cry of a hawk soaring overhead. The air was thick with anticipation, tempered by a calm patience born of long waiting. Arthur approached the sword with measured steps, his fingers tracing the familiar Celtic knotwork etched into the hilt. A quiet warmth seeped into his palm, a subtle reassurance that spoke of destiny's steady pull. Though still young and untested, a deep sense of connection stirred within him to bond to the land, to the legacy of kings, and to the path that awaited. As evening settled, the village embraced the soothing quiet of twilight. Fires flickered in hearths and braziers, casting dancing shadows across timber and stone. The scent of burning pine mingled with the sweetness of roasted chestnuts and herbs. Voices softened to murmurs, stories told gently by firelight, weaving a comforting blanket over all who listened. Merlin's calm presence lingered like a steady flame, his wisdom a quiet guide in the unfolding legend. Arthur lay beneath his heavy woolen blanket, the rough texture both grounding and warm. Above, stars blinked slowly in the deepening sky, their ancient light echoing the timeless rhythm of the earth. Dreams came softly, carrying whispers of courage, magic, and the slow, steady unfolding of a destiny written in the very fabric of the land. The dawn was slow to break over the ancient hills surrounding the village, and the world seemed to breathe in hushed reverence beneath the soft glow of early morning light. Mist lingered low in the valleys and curled in delicate tendrils through the woodland groves, blurring the edges of trees and softening the contours of stone walls. The sky was a pale wash of silver and faint rose hues, promising a day that would unfold quietly, like a whispered secret carried on the wind. The air was cool and crisp, carrying with it the faint, earthy aroma of damp moss and rich loam, mingled with the subtle sweetness of wild thyme and honeysuckle blooming unseen behind tangled hedgerows. Within the village, wooden shutters stirred softly as gentle breezes slipped through cracks and crevices, setting the loose threads of woven curtains to fluttering like the wings of silent moths. The thatched roofs were glazed with beads of dew, shimmering faintly as the first rays of sunlight seeped through the spreading branches of ancient oaks and beeches that guarded the village's edges. Somewhere nearby, the lowing of cattle mingled with the distant call of a cuckoo, weaving a slow, natural chorus that signaled the day's awakening. Arthur lay beneath thick woolen blankets, the rough texture soothing against his skin as his breathing slowed into the deep, even rhythm of restful sleep. His small chamber was bathed in gentle light, the flickering shadows cast by the smoldering embers in the hearth, dancing quietly along rough-hewn beams, and the walls lined with hand-carved wooden shelves. On one shelf rested a leather-bound book, its pages yellowed and worn, filled with tales of heroes and enchanted forests, stories whispered to him by his caretakers on long evenings, their voices low and steady, like the steady heartbeat of the earth itself. The faint scent of dried herbs hung in the room, bundles of lavender and sage suspended from wooden pegs overhead, their fragrance calming and grounding. Outside the window, tendrils of smoke spiraled lazily upward from the peat fires that warmed the village, their soft crackle a comforting sound amidst the stillness. Arthur stirred, eyelids fluttering open to the serene light filtering softly through narrow panes of glass. He rose slowly, savoring the cool morning air that brushed against his face as he stepped outside. His feet met the worn cobblestones, smooth from countless footsteps that had passed this way through decades and centuries. The village was stirring to life with gentle sounds, the clatter of wooden carts drawn by oxen as they moved along rutted paths, the low murmur of villagers exchanging greetings in quiet tones, and the rhythmic pounding from the blacksmith's forge as the smith began his day's work, shaping glowing iron into horseshoes and tools. Women gathered near the stone well, their hands deft and sure as they drew fresh water, the metallic clang of buckets dipping and rising echoing softly. Their voices, low and melodic, intertwined with the splash of water and the occasional burst of laughter from children playing nearby. Their garments, hand-woven and dyed in deep shades of indigo, russet, and moss green, whispered of the land the colors of the forest floor, the soil, and the clear skies. Arthur's path led him toward the great forest, the towering trees standing tall and solemn like ancient sentinels cloaked in moss and lichen. The bark of oak and beech was rough beneath his fingertips, pocked and grooved from centuries of weather. Sunlight sifted through the dense canopy in scattered golden beams, spotlighting ferns unfurling their delicate fronds and clusters of wildflowers, primroses, bluebells, and the occasional bright foxglove that carpeted the soft forest floor. The air was rich with the scent of pine needles and wet earth, layered with faint hints of sweet heather and the subtle spice of wild garlic. The gentle rustle of leaves overhead was punctuated by the melodic calls of songbirds, a blackbird's clear whistle the trill of a wren, and the occasional soft coo of a wood pigeon. Small animals moved, unseen squirrels scampered up trunks. The quick flicker of a rabbit's white tail disappeared behind a bush, and the steady, patient movements of a hedgehog rustling through fallen leaves created a symphony of life in quiet motion. At a clear spring nestled among ancient stones, Arthur knelt to drink, cupping the icy water in his hands. It was cool and sweet, a refreshing balm that revived his spirit. Tiny fish darted beneath the surface, their scales catching glimmers of sunlight like liquid silver. Around the spring, moss-covered rocks and delicate flowers formed a natural sanctuary, the air thick with a sense of calm and timelessness. As he returned to the village, the sounds and smells of daily life enfolded him again. The blacksmith's hammer rang out in steady beats, shaping iron as smoke curled from the forge. The scent of fresh bread baking filled the air, mingling with roasted herbs drying on wooden racks and the tang of burning pine from hearth fires. Villagers moved with purpose and grace, farmers tending fields, children chasing one another through narrow lanes, elders sitting quietly sharing stories beneath the shade of apple trees. In the village square, the great cathedral stood as a silent witness to the passage of time. Its weathered stone walls were bathed in warm afternoon light, the intricate carvings of saints and beasts softened by centuries of rain and wind. The sword in the stone gleamed faintly at the center of the courtyard, its leather-bound hilt cool to the touch and etched with delicate Celtic knotwork. Around it, a small crowd gathered in quiet reverence, their voices hushed as they shared tales of the sword's ancient magic and the promise of the king yet to come. Arthur approached the sword once more, his heart steady but filled with a gentle anticipation. His fingers closed around the hilt, the worn leather rough but familiar beneath his palm. As he pulled, the blade slid free with surprising ease, the stone releasing its hold, as if acknowledging a destiny fulfilled. A hush fell over the crowd, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. Sunlight broke through a patch of cloud, bathing Arthur in a warm golden glow. The sword gleamed like a beacon of hope and unity, a symbol not just of power but of wisdom, courage, and the slow, steady path that lay ahead. As evening deepened into night, the village settled beneath a star-studded sky. Fires flickered and crackled in hearths and braziers, sending dancing shadows across timber walls and cobblestone streets. The air was rich with the scent of pine smoke, roasting chestnuts, and sweet herbs. Voices softened to gentle murmurs, stories told by firelight, weaving a tapestry of history, magic, and promise. Merlin's presence was felt like a calm flame, his quiet wisdom guiding the unfolding legend. Arthur lay beneath a heavy woolen blanket, the coarse fabric both grounding and warm against his skin. Above, the stars blinked slowly in the vast, timeless sky, their distant light echoing the steady heartbeat of the earth itself. Dreams came softly, carrying whispers of ancient magic, slow-growing strength, and the unfolding destiny of a king who would shape the fate of the land. The dawn crept quietly over the ancient hills surrounding the village, its soft lights spilling like honey across dew-soaked meadows and weathered stone walls. The sky was a gentle wash of pale lavender and silver, slowly deepening into warmer tones as the sun began its slow ascent. The air was cool and fragrant, carrying the delicate scents of moist earth mingled with the subtle sweetness of wildflowers, blooming primroses, bluebells nodding softly beneath ancient oaks, and the faint perfume of honeysuckle winding its way through dense hedgerows. A gentle breeze whispered through the tall grasses, rustling leaves and sending ripples through fields of swaying wheat. Within the village, the first signs of life stirred in hushed rhythms. Wooden shutters creaked softly as they were pushed open, welcoming the fresh morning air. From chimneys, thin trails of smoke curled upward, blending with the mist that still lingered in quiet pockets among the cobblestone streets. Somewhere nearby, the lowing of cattle mingled with the soft cooing of doves, and the distant call of a cuckoo echoed faintly across the rolling hills. The faintest patter of feet sounded on worn flagstones as villagers moved slowly, deliberately, beginning their day with careful, practiced motions. Arthur lay beneath thick woolen blankets in his small chamber, the rough texture comforting against his skin as his breathing slowed in deep, restful sleep. The room was suffused with the muted light of early morning, filtered through narrow window panes smeared faintly with dust and age. Shadows danced softly on walls darkened by years of peat smoke, flickering as the last embers glowed gently in the hearth. Shelves carved from oak held an assortment of simple treasures: smooth river stones collected on long walks, feathers of woodland birds, and a small leather-bound book filled with tales of heroes and enchanted forests, stories whispered to him in evenings past by the caretakers who watched over him with gentle eyes and steady hands. The faint scent of dried herbs hung in the room, bundles of lavender, rosemary, and thyme suspended from sturdy wooden pegs overhead, filling the space with their calming fragrance. Outside, the village awaited the sun's full rise, and the soft crackling of fires kindled anew offered a quiet soundtrack to the slow awakening. Arthur stirred, eyelids fluttering open to the serene glow that bathed his chamber. He rose slowly, savoring the cool touch of the wooden floor beneath his bare feet. The air was crisp but comforting, imbued with the fresh scents of pine resin and morning dew. He dressed carefully in homespun linen garments, dyed in soft earth tones, muted greens, warm browns, and gentle blues, their coarse fabric worn smooth from many days' use, but still carrying the faint stiffness of hand-woven cloth. Stepping outside, Arthur was greeted by the familiar tapestry of village life unfolding around him. The cobblestone streets, slick with lingering dew, glistened faintly in the growing light. Villagers moved quietly through their morning rituals. Women carrying woven baskets brimming with fresh herbs and garden vegetables, their voices low and melodic as they exchanged greetings near the stone well. Men preparing tools and harnesses for the day's labor. Children chasing one another in carefree bursts of laughter, their footsteps light on mossy flagstones. The scent of baking bread drifted from open windows, rich and inviting, mingling with the sharp tang of burning peat and the subtle sweetness of roasting herbs hung over hearth fires. Dogs padded lazily along fences, their noses twitching at the smells carried on the breeze, while chickens clucked and scratched in yards bursting with fresh greenery. Arthur's path led him toward the great forest that stretched like a dark sea beyond the village limits. Towering oaks, beeches, and pines stood sentinel along the path, their rough bark mottled with moss and delicate lichens. The canopy above filtered sunlight into a shimmering mosaic of gold and emerald, dappling the forest floor, where soft ferns unfurled their delicate fronds and clusters of wildflowers carpeted the shaded earth. The air here was cooler, redolent with the rich scents of pine needles, damp soil, and the faint spice of blooming heather. The forest breathed with life, the whisper of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze, the sharp call of a jay, the soft tapping of a woodpecker, searching bark for hidden insects. Small animals moved stealthily beneath the undergrowth, squirrels darting nimbly among branches, rabbits slipping silently through thickets, and the occasional flash of a fox's russet fur as it padded between shadows. Near a crystal-clear spring nestled among moss-covered stones, Arthur knelt to drink. The water was icy and pure, shimmering with the reflected light of the sky. Tiny fish darted beneath its surface, their scales flickering like scattered jewels. Around the spring, delicate violets, primroses, and forget-me-nots nodded in the breeze, their colors vivid against the lush green moss that blanketed the rocks and earth. Refreshed, Arthur made his way back toward the village, his senses absorbing the steady rhythm of life, returning to the place he called home. The hammer of the blacksmith rang out, forging tools and horseshoes in a steady, measured cadence. The rich aroma of roasting meats and sweet herbs mingled with fresh bread cooling on wooden tables. The low murmur of conversation and laughter drifted through the air, weaving a comforting tapestry of sound. In the village square, the great cathedral stood solemn and proud, its ancient stones glowing softly in the mid-morning sun. The carvings of saints and mythical beasts adorning its walls were softened by centuries of rain and wind, their faces worn but still full of dignity. At the center of the courtyard, the legendary sword remained embedded in the stone, its leather-wrapped hilt glinting faintly in the light. Villagers gathered quietly around the sword, their eyes filled with reverence and hope. Some offered whispered prayers, others exchanged stories of the sword's ancient magic and the promise it held for the future. The air was thick with a calm patience, a stillness born of long waiting and deep faith. Arthur approached the sword with measured steps, feeling the steady beating of his heart echoing softly in his ears. His fingers closed around the familiar hilt, the worn leather rough yet comforting beneath his palm. He pulled slowly, deliberately, and the blade slid free with a smoothness that startled those gathered. The stone released its hold as if it had been waiting only for this moment. A hush fell over the crowd. The sun broke through a drifting cloud, casting a warm golden glow upon Arthur and the sword, which gleamed like a beacon of hope and unity. The sword was not merely a weapon, but a symbol of wisdom, courage, and the patient unfolding of destiny. As evening deepened and twilight painted the sky in hues of lavender and rose, the village settled beneath a blanket of calm. Fires flickered and crackled in hearths and braziers, casting warm shadows upon stone and timber. The scent of pine smoke mingled with the sweet aroma of roasting chestnuts and drying herbs. Voices softened to gentle murmurs, stories told softly by firelight, weaving a comforting blanket of history and magic. Merlin's presence was felt as a steady flame in the quiet night, his calm wisdom a guiding light in the unfolding legend. Arthur lay beneath a heavy woolen blanket, the rough fabric warm and grounding against his skin. Above, the stars twinkled faintly in the deepening sky, their ancient light echoing the slow, steady heartbeat of the earth itself. Dreams came softly, carrying whispers of magic, courage, and the patient, steady unfolding of a destiny that would shape the fate of kingdoms. The day unfolded slowly, like a soft sigh rising from the earth, as dawn's gentle light spilled over the rolling hills and ancient woodlands surrounding the village. The sky was a tender blend of pale gold and lavender, a muted promise of warmth yet to come. Mist curled in delicate wisps over the fields, wrapping the world in a silken veil that softened every edge and hushed every sound. The air was cool and fragrant, carrying the subtle scent of dew-drenched grass mingled with wild thyme and blooming heather, while faint hints of pine resin drifted on the breeze from the dense forest beyond. Within the village, life began to stir in quiet rhythms. Wooden shutters creaked softly as they were pushed open to greet the new day. Thin spirals of smoke twirled skyward from thatched rooftops, mingling with the lingering mist as it retreated with the rising sun. The faint murmur of voices, the soft clatter of footsteps on cobblestone, and the gentle lowing of cattle created a soothing morning symphony that blended seamlessly with the gentle rustling of leaves and the distant calls of waking birds. Arthur lay beneath thick woolen blankets, their coarse texture both comforting and familiar against his skin. His chamber was dimly lit by the soft glow of embers smoldering quietly in the hearth. Shadows danced along the walls, revealing the faint outlines of wooden beams worn smooth by time and smoke. On a nearby shelf rested his treasured book of tale-sits, yellowed pages filled with stories of distant lands, brave heroes, and enchanted forest, nurturing his imagination with whispered dreams. Hanging bundles of dried lavender and sage filled the air with a calming fragrance, promising peace and protection. As the first golden rays filtered through the narrow window panes, Arthur awoke slowly, savoring the cool touch of the wooden floor beneath his feet. He dressed in homespun linen, dyed in muted shades of earth and sky, the fabric soft and worn from many days' wear. The scent of peat smoke mingled with the sweet aroma of fresh bread baking nearby as he stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The village was bathed in gentle light, its cobblestone streets glistening with dew. Villagers moved deliberately through their morning routines, women gathering near the stone well, their hands deft as they drew fresh water. Farmers tending to animals, their soft murmurs mingling with the rhythmic tapping of wooden tools. Children playing in the village green, their laughter light and free. The scent of herbs, rosemary, thyme, and mint drifted from open windows, blending with the earthy aroma of wet soil and burning peat. Arthur's steps carried him toward the forest, where ancient trees stood like silent sentinels, their thick trunks cloaked in moss and lichen. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting dappled patterns of gold and green upon the soft forest floor, carpeted with ferns, wildflowers, and fallen leaves. The air was rich with the scent of pine needles, moist earth, and faint hints of blooming heather. Birds flitted between branches, their songs weaving a gentle tapestry of sound: blackbirds' clear whistles, wrens' trills, and the soft cooing of wood pigeons. Near a clear spring nestled among moss-covered stones, Arthur knelt to drink. The icy water shimmered in the light, refreshing and pure. Tiny fish darted beneath the surface, their scales flickering like scattered jewels. Around the spring, delicate flowers, violets, primroses, and forget-me-nots bent gently in the breeze, their colors vivid against the lush green moss. Refreshed, Arthur returned to the village, where the steady rhythms of daily life embraced him once more. The blacksmith's hammer rang out, forging tools and horseshoes with rhythmic precision. The smell of roasting meat and sweet herbs filled the air, while merchants arranged baskets of fresh produce and dried goods. The murmurs of conversation and bursts of laughter wove through the streets, a comforting soundtrack to the unfolding day. In the village square, the great cathedral stood proudly, its weathered stones glowing warmly in the afternoon sun. Intricate carvings of saints and mythical beasts adorned the walls, their faces softened by centuries of wind and rain. At the center, the sword remained embedded in the stone, its blade gleaming faintly, the leather-wrapped hilt cool and inviting. Villagers gathered quietly around the sword, their eyes bright with hope and reverence. Some whispered prayers, others shared stories of ancient magic and the promise the sword held. The air hummed with calm anticipation, a stillness born of long waiting and deep faith. Arthur approached the sword, his heart steady, yet filled with gentle anticipation. His fingers closed around the familiar hilt, the rough leather warm beneath his palm. He pulled slowly and deliberately, and with surprising ease the blade slid free, the stone releasing its hold as if it had awaited only this moment. A hush fell over the crowd. Sunlight broke through a drifting cloud, casting a golden glow upon Arthur and the sword, which shimmered like a beacon of hope and unity. The sword was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of wisdom, courage, and the patient unfolding of destiny. As evening settled, the village embraced the soothing quiet of twilight. Fires flickered and crackled in hearths and braziers, casting dancing shadows across timber and stone. The scent of pine smoke mingled with roasted chestnuts and drying herbs. Voices softened to murmurs, stories told gently by firelight, weaving a comforting tapestry of history and magic. Merlin's calm presence lingered like a steady flame, his quiet wisdom guiding the unfolding legend. Arthur lay beneath a heavy woolen blanket, the rough fabric warm and grounding. Above, stars twinkled faintly in the deep sky, their ancient light echoing the slow, steady heartbeat of the earth itself. Dreams came softly, carrying whispers of magic, courage, and the steady unfolding of a destiny written in the very fabric of the land. The dawn crept upon the land with a slow, delicate grace, unfurling like a soft veil over the rolling hills and ancient woodlands that surrounded the village. Pale hues of lavender and rose bled gently into the morning sky, mingling with silver mist that curled like ethereal fingers around the gnarled trunks of oaks and beeches. The air was fresh and cool, saturated with the faint, sweet perfume of wild thyme and heather, mingling with the moist, earthy scent of dew-laden grass and rich, dark soil. Every blade of grass sparkled with tiny beads of moisture, trembling slightly in the gentle caress of an awakening breeze. Within the village, the world stirred with quiet rhythms born of centuries of habit and harmony with nature's unhurried pulse. The soft creak of wooden shutters being pushed open echoed faintly, allowing gentle rays of amber light to spill into dimly lit rooms. From chimneys, thin tendrils of smoke wove upward, disappearing into the slowly brightening sky, mingling with the dissipating morning mist. The faint sound of footsteps on smooth cobblestones, the low murmur of voices exchanged in the early light, and the distant calls of birds created a peaceful symphony, setting the tone for a day unfolding at the earth's own patient tempo. Arthur lay wrapped in thick woolen blankets, their coarse texture both grounding and comforting against his skin. His chamber was suffused with the soft glow of dying embers in the hearth, their fading warmth sending flickering shadows across the walls darkened by time and smoke. The rough wooden beams above bore faint scars from years past, small notches and carvings left by hands long gone, whispers of childhood games and memories now settled like dust in the quiet room. On a simple shelf rested his cherished book of tales, its yellowed pages worn from countless readings, filled with stories of distant kingdoms, brave heroes, and enchanted forests' dreams whispered to him in soft voices beneath the flickering firelight. Hanging bundles of lavender, sage, and rosemary filled the air with calming fragrances, promising peace and protection through the day. The first golden beams of sunlight filtered through the narrow window panes, painting gentle patterns across the wooden floor. Arthur stirred, the quiet warmth of the morning coaxing him from sleep. He rose slowly, savoring the cool touch of the floorboards beneath his bare feet. The air was crisp and fragrant, carrying the mingled scents of pine resin, fresh earth, and the faint sweetness of blooming wildflowers. Dressing carefully in homespun linen garments dyed in muted hues of earth and sky-soft greens, browns, and blues, he wrapped himself in familiarity and simplicity, the fabric worn smooth by time, yet still holding the slight stiffness of hand-woven cloth. Stepping outside, Arthur was greeted by the village unfolding in gentle grace beneath the soft morning light. The cobblestone streets glistened faintly with dew, their uneven surfaces worn smooth by countless footsteps over the ages. Villagers moved through their morning routines, with quiet purpose women drawing fresh water from the stone. Well, their voices low and melodic as they exchanged greetings and news. Farmers tending to animals and preparing tools for the day. Children chasing one another in bursts of laughter that echoed lightly through the air. The scent of baking bread drifted from open windows, warm and inviting, mingling with the sharp tang of burning peat and the herbal sweetness of drying herbs hung from beams and rafters. Arthur's path led him toward the vast forest that loomed like a living wall beyond the village limits. Towering oaks, beeches, and pines stood as ancient sentinels, their bark rough and deeply furrowed, cloaked in thick mosses and delicate lichens that softened their mighty forms. The dense canopy above filtered sunlight into a shimmering mosaic of gold and emerald, dappling the forest floor where soft ferns unfurled their delicate fronds and clusters of wildflowers, primroses, bluebells, and the occasional bright foxglove carpeted the shaded earth. The air here was cooler and richer, thick with the scent of pine needles, damp earth, and the subtle spice of blooming heather. The forest was alive with quiet symphonies, the soft rustling of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze, the melodic calls of blackbirds, wrens, and wood pigeons weaving a gentle tapestry of sound, the scurrying of squirrels among branches, the swift dash of a rabbit's white tail disappearing behind a thicket, and the slow, deliberate movements of a hedgehog rustling through fallen leaves. Each sound was a note in the timeless orchestra of nature, resonating softly through the stillness. Arthur approached a crystal-clear spring nestled among moss-covered stones, its waters bubbling softly as they tumbled over smooth pebbles. He knelt beside the spring, cupping the cool water in his hands and letting it flow over his fingers, feeling its refreshing chill invigorate his spirit. Tiny fish darted beneath the surface, their silver scales flickering like scattered jewels in the sunlight. Around the spring, delicate violet, primrose, and forget-me, knot petals nodded gently in the breeze, their colors vivid against the lush green moss that blanketed the stones and earth. Refreshed and quieted by the sanctuary of the spring, Arthur made his way back toward the village. The rhythms of daily life welcomed him once more, the blacksmith's hammer ringing out in steady beats as glowing iron was shaped and forged. The rich aromas of roasting meat, fresh bread, and drying herbs mingling in the air, the murmur of voices and bursts of laughter weaving through streets lined with stone cottages and wooden shops. Each sound and scent was a thread in the rich tapestry of the village's life, grounding Arthur in the familiar, even as destiny beckoned. At the heart of the village stood the great cathedral, proud and solemn in the mid-afternoon sun. Its ancient stones glowed warmly beneath the light, the intricate carvings of saints and mythical beasts softened by centuries of wind and rain. At the center of the courtyard, the legendary sword remained embedded in the stone, its blade gleaming faintly, the worn leather hilt cool and inviting to the touch. Gathered nearby, villagers watched quietly, their faces filled with hope and reverence. Some whispered prayers, others shared hushed stories of the sword's magic and the promise it held for the future. The air was thick, with a calm patience, a stillness born of long waiting and deep faith. Arthur stepped forward slowly, heart steady, yet full of gentle anticipation. His fingers closed around the familiar hilt, the rough leather warm beneath his palm. With deliberate care he pulled, and the blade slid free as if the stone had been waiting only for him. A hush fell over the crowd. The sun broke through a drifting cloud, bathing Arthur and the sword in golden light. The blade shimmered, like a beacon of hope and unity, not merely a weapon, but a symbol of wisdom, courage, and the slow, steady unfolding of destiny. As evening deepened and twilight painted the sky in soft hues of lavender and rose, the village settled beneath a calming hush. Fires flickered and crackled in hearths and braziers, casting warm shadows upon stone and timber. The scent of pine smoke mingled with roasted chestnuts and fragrant herbs. Voices softened to gentle murmurs, stories told softly by firelight, weaving a comforting tapestry of history and magic. Merlin's presence lingered like a steady flame, his quiet wisdom guiding the unfolding legend. Arthur lay beneath a heavy woolen blanket, the rough fabric warm and grounding. Above, stars twinkled faintly in the deepening sky, their ancient light echoing the slow, steady heartbeat of the earth itself. Dreams came softly, carrying whispers of courage, magic, and the patient unfolding of a destiny destined to shape the very fabric of the land.